Hi, I'm Christy Fusco, and I'm here at the Uniontown Library. We're fortunate enough today to have an interview with Richard Robbins, longtime reporter. I've known him my whole professional career here at Uniontown, and we're here because Dick recently published a book of nonfiction about JFK Rising, and we're going to talk about that. But before that, Dick, would you tell us a little bit about your career in Fayette County? And
Sure. Well, I'm a native of Uniontown. Went to Penn State, first Fayette campus and then University Park, where I majored in political science. Became a newspaper reporter way back, a long time ago, 1970, in Newcastle, Pennsylvania was my first job, Newcastle News. And then I moved on to the Greensburg Tribune Review, which I joined in 1977 and worked there until 2012. And so it's been a long road in terms of reporting and writing, and I've enjoyed it. So,
well, you've written a number of books before this, but could you briefly describe, JFK Rising for our viewers?
JFK Rising is the story of the 1960 West Virginia primary between Senator John Kennedy and Senator Hubert Humphrey. And it was the pivotal primary during the 1960 campaign for the Democrats. And the book tells a story about not only Kennedy's activities during the campaign, but the activities of hundreds of West Virginians who volunteered for the Kennedy campaign. It also tells the story of Hubert Humphrey and his role in the campaign, and others, including Lyndon Johnson and Senator Robert Byrd, who were also important figures during the campaign. So it tries to provide a real in-depth look at the West Virginia primary, which again was the crucial primary.
Is that why you wrote it, or why did you?
Well, I think it's a great story, both from a political standpoint and from a personal standpoint, both for Kennedy and for the West Virginians, who numbered again in the hundreds, if not in the thousands, who volunteered for the Kennedy campaign. Some of the West Virginians literally spent a month or so, 24 hours a day. Some of them took vacation time or took time off of work to volunteer for the Kennedy campaign. And that was one of the secrets or one of the keys to Kennedy's victory.
Was this unusual? Had this happened?
Well, I think to the extent that it did happen, yeah, it was unusual. I mean, there has always been volunteers in political campaigns going way, way back. But the Kennedy campaign was able to harness the enthusiasm that Kennedy generated as a candidate. And certainly it was, I think it was fairly new in West Virginia, which had been dominated as many regions had by many in many states by political organizations, by political parties, by political bosses, and these were really civilians in terms of politics. Many of these people had never been involved in a political campaign before, and they were drawn to Kennedy for a variety of reasons, but they were one of the, if not the most important factor in Kennedy's victory in West Virginia.
Is that part of what surprised you, or in writing and researching this book?
To some extent, yeah. I had always, previous to writing the book or researching the book, I had known about the West Virginia primary, and I was vaguely aware of the number of volunteers and the importance of volunteers in the campaign. But that was one of the surprises in terms of the extent to which volunteers played a crucial role in the West Virginia primary.
So that was just one of the surprises.
That was just one of the surprises.
What are some of the other surprises?
Well, I was surprised actually at the extent and the role that Jackie Kennedy played in the campaign. In the spring of 1960, the primary was held May 10th, 1960. And the actual campaigning lasted between early April and May 10th. It was a time that Jackie, it was just before she became pregnant with John Jr. But I was surprised at, she went everywhere in West Virginia, sometimes alone, but most of the time with her husband. She made an impression wherever she went, a good impression wherever she went. There was a story, a fellow by the name of Strider, who was a former Episcopalian head of the church in West Virginia. And Kennedy had solicited his support, the night that they met, he went to a campaign rally in Charlestown, West Virginia, which is in the eastern panhandle of West Virginia. And he commented in his diary later on that Jackie Kennedy made a late appearance at the event and made one of her usual graceful little talks. And so she was a real asset to then Senator Kennedy in the campaign. And I was, frankly, I was surprised by that, to the extent to which she had campaigned and how effective she was as a campaigner. It had been the Kennedy practice up to this point to involve members of his family. He had just come off. He and both Hubert Humphrey had run in the Wisconsin primary earlier in the spring, and the entire Kennedy family was there. The sisters, Bobby Kennedy, Ted Kennedy. In West Virginia, for some reason, and also Rose Kennedy, Senator Kennedy's mother, for some reason, the sisters and the mother did not campaign in West Virginia. Ted did, Bobby was a campaign manager, and Jackie did. So it was a little bit a different flavor in terms of the Kennedy family. But certainly Jackie Kennedy played a really crucial role, and I was surprised by that, the extent to which she did.
Well, this part of our conversation really makes me think of someone my age who wasn't alive viewed those Kennedy years through the lens of the tragedy and the publicity that surrounded it, and certainly the black and white photos, which I think really influence how we look at things. It's from my perspective, it's very romanticized. Camelot, and was any of that media myth at play during the primary, or it was just beginning, which later we saw the full fruition when they visited Europe and Mrs. Kennedy became an international icon?
Well, John Kennedy had been a national figure from at least 1956, when he almost became the vice presidential nominee for the Democrats in 1956. But still, in 1960, he was a largely unknown quantity to most Americans. And no, there certainly was some glamour associated with Kennedy. He came from then one of the most wealthiest family in the United States. But this was definitely before Camelot, and frankly, the Camelot thing came along after his death. That romanticizing of certainly if in say early November 1963, he was killed on November 22nd. If someone had mentioned Camelot, well, that would have been the height of silliness. So that came along afterward. But this was, as the title implies, this is the emergence of John F. Kennedy,
Right.
And all that followed. From that.
So what was the significance of this primary, both short and long term?
Well, the real battle in West Virginia, or the real issue in West Virginia, was Kennedy's religion. He was a Catholic. And there had never been, up to that point, a Catholic president. In fact, there's only been one Catholic president in our history. That's John Kennedy. Well, there will be two when Joe Biden is inaugurated. But the issue, there was a lot of distrust among Protestants about the possibility of a Catholic president, because it was charged that being a Catholic, that he would listen to not to the American people or to his own ideas and policies, but to the dictates of Rome, the Vatican, and the Pope. And so that was a battle that Kennedy waged and met head on. So the fact, and West Virginia was 95% Protestant. So this was the primary to show that John Kennedy could attract Protestant voters. And if he had lost in West Virginia to Hubert Humphrey, it's doubtful that John Kennedy would have been the nominee and therefore would never have been elected president of the United States. And if you think about him losing the primary and not becoming the nominee and not becoming the president, well, then you have a whole new series of events that could have unfolded beginning in January 1961. Perhaps Richard Nixon would have been elected president. There had been discussion that probably after the November election in 1960, that Kennedy was the only Democrat who could have beaten Dick Nixon in 1960. Dick Nixon was part of an administration, a Republican administration, that was very popular. Dwight Eisenhower was enormously popular president. And without the Kennedy victory in West Virginia, there's probably no Kennedy presidency. There's no Lyndon Johnson presidency. There's no Richard Nixon presidency in 1968, which means there's maybe no Watergate.
No détente with China.
No détente with China during the maybe there's no Cuban Missile Crisis, or maybe there is a Cuban Missile Crisis and it turns out a whole lot worse than it did turn out. So it's tremendous ramifications.
How do they allay those fears of that 95% Protestant population? And could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, it cuts both ways. Kennedy, he had fought the issue, or the issue had been raised early on. And as I said, they had just come from Wisconsin primary, where the issue had been discussed. But nothing like it had been discussed in West Virginia. And Kennedy met the issue head on. He made a memorable appearance Sunday night before the primary was held, a television appearance, a half-hour television show that was spread throughout, that was seen throughout West Virginia, in which he raised his right hand and said, "When I take the oath of office, or if I take the oath of office, I'm swearing to uphold the Constitution, and that's, that'll be my only guide." And he talked about the fact that he had served in World War II, that his brother had served in World War II and had been killed in World War II. He had been wounded in World War II. He had served in Congress, in the Senate, taking just about the same oath that he would take as president. And the message was, if he could serve in the armed services, if his brother could serve in the armed services, if he could serve in the House, in the Senate, and not betray the trust of the people who put him there, then he would do the same thing as president. He was a very, very persuasive individual on the stump, speaking. And the religious issue was not the only issue, but it was the most prominent issue. He also spoke about the need to revitalize the economy of West Virginia. Then, as now, West Virginia, has a lot of economic problems, and the coal industry, which was in decline even in 1960. So he spoke about that and the need to revive the economy. But the religious issue was the most important issue.
And he met it head on.
Right, he met it head on.
Well, do you have any favorite anecdotes or stories that you've gathered in your research and writing that you'd like to share?
Well, yeah, a couple. Right. On this issue of Kennedy personally, there's a great story that I had never seen published before. In 1959, a neighbor in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, a woman by the name of Nancy Coleman, she said, "Jack," and she was kind of kidding him. She said, "Jack, you don't really want to be president, do you?" And he said, "Nancy, I not only want to be president, I'm going to be president." And that spoke to his determination. And the guy who recorded that was one of his best friends, a reporter by the name of Charlie Bartlett. And he said that summed up for him John Kennedy, that John Kennedy summoned what he needed to do when he needed to do it. So I like that story. There's during the campaign itself, he appeared in Wheeling, West Virginia. And after a long day of campaigning, the formal campaigning was over, speaking. It was around 11 o'clock at night. He was bone tired. And 4 individuals, political figures from Wheeling, took him out to a place called the Cane Club, which was a private club in South Wheeling. And again, Kennedy was bone tired. They brought him into, it was a kind of a bar area. And they pushed him out there, sort of. And Kennedy, revived, climbed on the bar and said, "If anyone will give me a beer, I'll give you a speech." And I think that's just a great story. And one of my favorite stories involves a fellow by the name of Bill Richardson, who was from Parkersburg. He was an attorney. He was a Protestant, prominent figure in the community, and he was very important to the Kennedy campaign in the Parkersburg area because he was a Protestant and he was well known. But anyway, after he was invited then to the inauguration, did not get to see or meet or talk to John Kennedy during the inauguration in January of 1961. did not see John Kennedy until October of 1962. And he saw him. John Kennedy came to Western Pennsylvania to campaign for House Democrats for the midterm election. He was in Menneson, Washington, PA, campaigned in Pittsburgh. He was coming back after a day of campaigning, and he was staying at the William Penn Hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. And as you might imagine, there was a big crowd, raucous crowd outside along the street, on the sidewalk in front of the hotel. And Kennedy in the presidential limousine spies Bill Richardson, who's there in the crowd. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of people, and he sees Bill Richardson, who he hasn't seen since May of 1960. Okay. And he says, "Bill Richardson, what are you doing here?" And Bill Richardson said, "I came to see you, Mr. President," which was a white lie. He was actually in town. It was a Friday. The next day was the Pitt, West Virginia football game. He was in town to see the football game. He had no idea that his friend John Kennedy was going to be in town too. But I think it's marvelous that Kennedy, after all these months, 26 months or so, would pick out of a tremendous crowd, "Bill Richardson, what are you doing here?"
I think it is a great story. Now, I was also struck, Dick, while you're talking about these stories, is you're mentioning a lot of names of towns that I think are much different today. I mean, I can't imagine that a presidential candidate or a sitting president, would necessarily find it advantageous to visit Menneson today, or I mean, were you struck by the change in our region in these last 60, 70 years?
Well, there's obviously been a tremendous change in the region, and tremendous political change. These guys, as president, John Kennedy he campaigned in Menneson. It's hard to imagine, during this campaign that just ended, Donald Trump came, I think, to the Pittsburgh airport a couple times and campaigned. Joe Biden came to downtown Pittsburgh and campaigned. It's very rare, for whatever reason, and I think it's a great mistake for these candidates not to campaign in places like Washington, and Little Washington, and Menneson, and elsewhere. There's no reason they shouldn't, but they don't.
So that we won't talk about why that is. I wanted to say, readers can buy this book here at the library. Just give us a call and we'll arrange for you to get a copy.
Right.
But I guess, are there things that we didn't touch upon that I have missed a great opportunity for a good story? Because this is a half hour filled with good stories.
There was a great story, I think, occurred in Morgantown. A guy by the name of John Piles, Pyles, who thought of himself as an entertainer, as a singer. Actually had been friends with comedian Don Knotts. Mm-hmm. Don Knotts was from Morgantown. Okay. Don Knotts was Barney on the Andy Griffith Show. And John Piles wanted to get into show business, and he was a singer. And fact is, there was a banquet held, a campaign banquet for Kennedy in Morgantown, mm-hmm. At the Hotel Morgan, which is on High Street in Morgantown. It's still there. Mm-hmm. And John Piles was going to sing or lead the singing at this campaign event. There was a song written for the campaign. I don't know if you know the song High Hopes. It was a Frank Sinatra song. I'm not going to sing it. But they adapted that song.
The high in the sky, apple pie. Okay.
Exactly, right. And they adapted that. They changed the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
And they used it throughout at least the spring primary. Frank Sinatra actually made a recording of it.
Okay.
So John Piles was going to lead the singing of this song at the banquet, the campaign banquet. Before the afternoon, before the banquet took place that evening, Piles goes to the Hotel Morgan and knocks on the Kennedy's door. And a Kennedy by the name of Kenny O'Donnell, who became quite famous, in the presidential years, came to the door. And John Piles introduced himself, said he wanted to see Senator Kennedy. And what he had was a demo record that he gave to Kennedy, and he gave to Kennedy in the hope that Kennedy would pass it on to his dad, to Joe Kennedy, who was friends with a singer by the name of Morton Downey. Now, probably people have never heard of Morton Downey in this day and age, but Morton Downey was a fairly well-known singer, and he was a good friend of Joe Kennedy. And he said, "Can you get this in the hands of Morton Downey to John Kennedy?" John Kennedy had come to the door. He had apparently just gotten out of the shower with a towel wrapped around his waist. And Kennedy, being polite, said, "Okay, I'll take it, and we'll see what we can do." Well, the banquet's that night. The next morning, Kennedy and Jackie are leaving Morgantown to go campaign elsewhere. And as before they're getting to drive away at the curb, there's John Piles again. And John Piles says, "Don't forget that demo I gave you." And Kennedy says, "Well, it's an awful busy time." And a few weeks later, in the mail, John Piles gets the demo back. It's never delivered. And so his show business career never really took off. John Piles later became a Monongalia County Commissioner in the 1990s or 2000s, early 2000s. But John Piles told that story to me. Again, it's a great story, and it sort of indicates how people, they were not like, "Wow, this is John Kennedy. I can't approach John Kennedy." Well, this was, Senator Kennedy, and
could you do me a favor?
He's going to do me a favor. He's going to help my career. Maybe I'll get into show business, big time show business.
That's really nice.
Yeah, it's a great story.
Well, so Dick, just in closing, and it may be a question that's going to take us a little longer to answer. You sort of shone the light on this primary. And when you emerge, having researched and written it and relived those times from this time period, what could you say was your least favorite thing about either the election process or, some thing that either confirmed a dissatisfaction you've had with the process, or and what was your favorite thing to emerge? The light and the dark side of either what you discovered, either in a larger sense of the electoral process, or just looking back, the lightest and the darkest side of perhaps that primary or the candidate or the machine that was working around. What struck you as the best and the brightest and the worst and the darkest?
Well, I think the worst aspect of the primary was the vilification that came from a lot of Protestant lay people and leaders, particularly leaders, who cast a wary eye on Kennedy's religion. There were just dark forecasts of what would it mean to have a Catholic in the White House. He would be beholden to the Pope. He would usurp the Constitution because of that. That was very disturbing, and it kind of goes along with the idea that we've had from time to time in this country, the prejudices that we've shown toward other minority groups. I mean, Catholics were a minority in Protestant America in 1960, very definitely so. And I suppose the brightest aspect of it was the hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers who came out to work for the Kennedy campaign. The fact that that many people believed, with their heart and soul in John Kennedy, I think speaks well of both Kennedy and the West Virginians. Also, there was a dark cloud that was cast, that continues to be cast, I think, to some extent, over West Virginia itself. There was some talk about, before the primary, that if you're going to have a make or break primary for the nominee of the Democratic Party, you wouldn't hold it necessarily in West Virginia, which was not a typical state. West Virginia, as now, was a very poor state in West Virginia, and it was looked down upon as these hillbillies out here, and Kennedy never spoke down to the people of West Virginia. Mm-hmm. Unlike, surprisingly, Hubert Humphrey did from time to time. Mm-hmm. There was a condescension about condescending attitude on Humphrey's part at some points during the campaign toward West Virginia and toward West Virginians. But John Kennedy never did that. Mm-hmm. Jackie Kennedy told a story after the assassination in one of a series of interviews that she did about her husband. And she said she never met an individual in West Virginia who she didn't like, who she didn't think was genuine. Mm-hmm. You could go and meet someone on their porch, on their rickety old porch, and they might have some teeth out and all that sort of. But she said they were always warm and friendly and encouraging to her and to her husband. And so I think that was I think that spoke to Kennedy, the fact that he just never, here he was, one of the most wealthiest men in America, tremendously good-looking guy, a Harvard graduate, won a Pulitzer Prize, had everything going for him, and yet, he, well, not yet, but he took people as they were, and that was another surprise, actually, that I learned. It was, to me, it was a surprise how even shy Kennedy could be. And you don't think of a politician, and you don't think of John Kennedy as being shy. But there are, I can point out in the book, just a number of cases of people commenting on the fact that, that he was not this outgoing, slap on the back sort of guy. He was really a reserved sort of guy. And he had a tremendous sensitivity, I think. Mm-hmm. He told one of his top West Virginians, Bob McDonough, and he was leaving the state for a couple of days to campaign elsewhere because campaigns were going on simultaneously elsewhere. But he said to Bob McDonough, when I get back, I'm going to have some new speeches. I know you're getting tired of listening to these. And there are other cases in which, he would begin in the back of a crowd and work his way forward to the platform. And he would actually say, "Excuse me," and would come up to people and say, "I'm John Kennedy, can I shake your hand?" As if people didn't know who he was.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. Right. So that was a surprise to me.
Okay. Just, talking about the volunteers, Dick, I wanted to ask, did you speak with any of those volunteers, or it's all research? So do those folks talking today now about that moment in their lives, are they still feeling the positivity? Do they look back on that as a time that they're really proud of in their life?
Right. Yeah. Well, 2020, I suppose most of the volunteers have now passed on. Now, I began researching this book some time ago, and so I did speak with any number of volunteers, including Bill Richardson, including the folks who escorted Kennedy to the Cane Club, and they were all extremely proud. Fact is, there are some folks, some quotes from volunteers were saying this was the most important and invigorating period of their entire lives. And so, yeah, they were, and to some extent, like Bill Richardson was a good example. When Kennedy died after his assassination, he kind of lost interest in politics. So they were extremely proud of the role, and they had known because John Kennedy made his last appearance in West Virginia in the summer of 1963, right before he went to Europe. If you were
okay,
not everyone will remember that, but there were tumultuous reception in West Berlin, and he went to Ireland, and just a tremendous outpouring.
He went with Mrs. Kennedy, right? Isn't that his famous quote? I visited Paris.
No, that was an earlier. That was 1961. No,
Okay.
Jackie Ken didn't go to Europe in '63 with him.
So this is the Ich bin ein Berliner.
Ich bin ein Berliner speech in West Berlin, where 1 million or so West Berliners greeted. It was, the fact is, John Kennedy's told someone, tell any future president if they ever fell down, go to West Berlin. But he made his last appearance in West Virginia, and right before his trip to Europe in summer '63. It was at the centennial celebration, 1963. West Virginia became a state in 1863 in the middle of the Civil War. And he appeared in Charleston. And he said in his speech that if it hadn't been for West Virginia, I wouldn't have some of the responsibilities or the burdens that I now carry. And so it was very well known that, and so volunteers were very proud of the fact that they were able to help Kennedy become the nominee and then later president of the United States. So.
Dick, I've really enjoyed this conversation. And
can I add that people can also get the book at Amazon?
That's right. It's not just at the library. You can also check Amazon. Give us a call. Thank you so much, Dick, for spending this time with us. And I
Thank you.
Hope our listeners and viewers will pick up the book. We have it here. Thanks.